Hello, everybody, and welcome to my podcast. You are listening to Magic Dara, and you're very welcome to A Magician's Thoughts On, the podcast where you get a magician's perspective on a whole bunch of topics. Speaking of which, today's topic is psychics. So, guys, I must admit, this is really rather fun. Before we jump into the topic today, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context and how we actually got to this moment. If you're listening to this, this is in fact my very first podcast. If you are a fan of my content, you'll know that I've been uploading all things magic for the better part of a year now. And, you know, if you are interested, please do consider subscribing. But for those of you who know already, you know that much. I recently appeared on the Sergeant Ducky podcast, and I don't know if Sergeant Ducky is going to listen to this podcast, but if you are listening, Sergeant Ducky, you are a legend, and thank you very much for having me on. On that podcast, we discussed a whole bunch of topics. Sergeant Ducky has two separate YouTube channels. He's an incredibly successful YouTuber. His original channel is simply called Sergeant Ducky, Sergeant spelled S-J-T. Not SJT, SGT, forgive me. And his secondary channel, which only started several weeks ago, where he's focusing primarily on podcasting, that's called Ducky's Room. That's the channel I appeared on. And like I said, Sergeant Ducky and I, we spoke about a whole bunch of topics on that podcast, some philosophical, some moral, some ethical. And it was just an absolutely fascinating experience. And the feedback from that podcast seems to have been generally, not only generally, but overwhelmingly extremely positive. And a lot of people in the comment section there wanted to hear more from me. And some specifically requested that I do my own podcast, and they'd love to hear my thoughts on other topics. I think that's amazing to start off. Sorry, just having a sip of water. That's incredible that people want to hear more from me. And again, I can't give Sergeant Ducky enough credit, really, because, you know, my channel, even though I've been working hard, I've uploaded a video on the week, every week for the better part of a year, my channel was still struggling to gain subscribers. After an entire year of uploading consistently, working hard, editing, creating videos to the best of my ability, I was hovering around the 200 subscriber mark, which is nothing to be ashamed of. And given the research and the study I did, it turns out that not even most people get that number of subscribers in their first year. So I was definitely above the average, which I was delighted about. But there's no denying that the grind was real. Well, I'm thankful to report that at the present time, I'm currently at around 460 subscribers, and that's all because of Ducky. Ducky's platform is obviously much, much larger than mine, and because of Ducky's generosity and kindness and featuring me on the podcast, I've gotten a massive increase in traffic. So, look, that's just absolutely amazing. And so, look, that's how we got to this moment. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of context, and that's why we're going to sit down today and have a discussion about psychics. And that is a topic that a lot of people are interested in, and I'm hoping that people will be interested more specifically on a magician's perspective on that topic. I just want to, before we jump into the topic itself, give you guys a warning. And this is very important if you're listening to this podcast. If you believe in and are comforted by the existence of psychic phenomena, if you're comforted by the notion that it's possible for someone to see the future, and, you know, if you have a fortune teller that you have attended in the past, and the things they've told you are deeply profound, and you love it, and you're comforted by it, and you really want to continue believing it, basically, if that's your position, I'm going to recommend that you tune out right now. The next, I don't know how long this is going to be. It could be half an hour, I'm not sure. But over the next 30 minutes or more, I'm going to be discussing in depth why psychics are full of shit. For lack of a better description, that is the goal here. I do not believe that psychic phenomena is real. I have been studying magic for 25 years thereabouts, and I've never found any evidence, compelling or otherwise, for the existence of psychic phenomena. So I just want to start off by giving you that warning, guys. If you are indeed a person who'd rather continue believing it and you don't want it questioned and it makes you feel good at night, well then, great. You carry on about your day, and perhaps I'll see you in the next video. That said, you may also fall into the category of a person who is comforted by this, but you are also steadfastly kind of committed to the truth, and you'd rather believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. If you are one of those people, well then, welcome aboard, because I'm going to delve in and reveal, for those of you who weren't aware, a lot of the tricks and a lot of the deception that psychics engage in order to hoodwink and exploit the public into believing things that there's actually no rational justification to believe in. On that note, that quote I used a moment ago, I'd rather people believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. Credit where credit is due, that comes from a huge inspiration of mine. His name is Matt Dillahunty. I don't know if Matt will ever listen to this podcast, but Matt, if you do, I love you, brother. Not only because of your, commitment to skepticism, but also because you're a magician too. So here's hoping one day Matt Dillahunty will listen to this, and if you do, Matt, goodness, if you ever appear on this podcast and we get to have a conversation, that will be, I can die happy then. Anyway, all that said, psychics, I guess we should start by defining what a psychic is, because there's a lot of ambiguity surrounding the topic. I've taken the liberty of Googling in advance what it actually means. If you type psychic into Google, you'll get the following, relating to or denoting faculties or phenomena that are apparently inexplicable by natural laws, especially involving telepathy or clairvoyance. So Google does its usual trick and defines something using other words that we then have to go and get a definition for also. So you heard two buzzwords mentioned there, telepathy and clairvoyance. So I've Googled those as well to get a definition, just to be more specific. Telepathy, according to Google, and you know what, I don't think it's a bad definition. Telepathy is defined as the supposed communication of thoughts or ideas by means other than the known senses. So, in other words, guys, mind reading, right? Being able to see into somebody's mind, being able to supernaturally sense what somebody is thinking, that kind of idea. And then the other buzzword, of course, there was clairvoyance. So what's a clairvoyant? Well, Google defines it as a person who claims to have a supernatural ability to perceive events in the future or beyond normal sensory contact. And so, yeah, predicting the future. Fortune telling, basically. So, guys, I'm going to take both of these ideas, being that, psychic phenomena is defined in relation to telepathy and clairvoyance. I'm going to take telepathy and clairvoyance one after another and explain to you why I think it's nonsense. So I'm going to start off with telepathy, going in chronological order there. Again, guys, the short answer is it's bullshit. Now, that wouldn't be a very compelling argument. Thank you guys for tuning in. Now you know it's bullshit. Have a nice day. Needless to say, you're going to need a little bit more than that. Well, guys, look, if telepathy is indeed defined as the ability to, as it says here, the supposed communication of thoughts or ideas by means other than the known senses. If telepathy is defined as mind reading, basically, well, let's get into it. Is mind reading real? Well, guys, if you watch my channel, I've got a series of videos called Dara's Street Deceptions, and in most of those episodes, I approach a stranger on the street, and I tell them information that there's no way I could possibly know. Think about that for a moment. I walk up to a stranger on the street, and I tell them what the PIN code for their phone is. I've never met this person, and yet I can tell them what their PIN code is. I walk up to a stranger on the street, and I tell them the name of a loved one who they've never spoken about out loud. Right? If I can do that, and I'm telling you that that's bullshit, if I can do that, and I'm telling you that it's magicians' tricks that explain that, then why would we believe that when a psychic reveals a piece of impossible information, that somehow the psychic is tuned into something real, that there's something supernatural going on? It seems to me, guys, that the difference between a magician and a psychic is presentation. I am a magician, and so when I approach someone and tell them something that I couldn't possibly know, they know it's a trick because I've told them I'm a magician, right? But if I brought them into a darkly lit room with a crystal ball on the table, and I told them, sit down and focus, and I'm going to enter your mind. If I presented that way, and then reveal the impossible information, unfortunately, guys, there's a certain percentage of the public who are more willing to buy into that. There are people out there, for one reason or another, in that particular context, who are more than willing to believe. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. Some are very human. Look, guys, our loved ones pass away, and life can be very tragic, and I completely understand. I completely empathize, as someone who has lost loved ones himself. I completely empathize with the desire for people to believe that there's something more, that there's something extra, that this life isn't just short and cruel and then we're snuffed out and that's the end. I get that. That makes sense to me. But unfortunately, if something comforts us, that doesn't necessarily make it true. Now, I'm hoping there's no very young listeners listening because I'm about to talk about Santa Claus, but by way of analogy, Santa Claus gives hope to children all around the world every Christmas. That doesn't mean that the Santa Claus narrative is true. If something comforts us, if something gives us hope, you'd be surprised the amount of people who think that the fact that something comforts them, that this somehow constitutes evidence for that thing. It doesn't. Of course it doesn't. So I just wanted to mention that, I get why people are comforted by believing in such supernatural phenomena. But again, guys, at risk of sounding insensitive, I don't really care if it comforts people. I'm interested in the truth. And if that sounds callous, perhaps this isn't the podcast for you, but that's my honest perspective. As Matt Dillahunty said, and I'm going to repeat it again, I'd rather believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. And I'm going to go one step further and say I think the world would be a better place if everybody adopted that mantra. So guys, when you watch my magic videos and you see me reveal an impossible piece of information, and yet I'm telling you that I've not done that using any supernatural ability, that should cause you concern if indeed you do believe that telepathy and mind reading is possible. But it's not just about that. Some of the things that psychics use, some of the techniques they use, are well understood and well established, and magicians have been using them for centuries. I want to make you aware of something known as a Barnum statement. Barnum statements are named after a very famous magician, P.T. Barnum. And a Barnum statement, basically, if you break it down, is a statement that is ambiguous but sounds specific. So it's this cleverly structured statement, which sounds like it's revealing very specific information about you, but really and truly it's actually quite ambiguous and vague. I'll give you an example of a Barnum statement. If I said to you right now, imagine I'm giving you a reading, so you come into my darkly lit room with my crystal ball. Straight away there, as I look into your eyes, I'm getting the sense that you're the kind of person who reflects quite a bit, especially after you've been in a social situation. You find yourself thinking, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I should have phrased that differently. And yet, while you were at the party, you found yourself being, full of joy, the center of attention, and not really reflecting at all. You were very out there and you were having fun. It's not until after the party that you go home and you have all of these thoughts and reflections, and you begin to feel a little bit more subdued in yourself. You begin to feel a little bit more quiet and conservative. Now, what did I really say there? That might have sounded like a lot of information. It might have sounded very specific. It might have sounded like I was describing intimate details of a person's personality. But all I've actually said there is that you have an extroverted side and you have an introverted side. Credit to Darren Brown for that one. He often uses that example, and I think it's a great one. That sounds specific, and there's some big words in there, and it can all sound very fancy. And again, in the right context, that might sound like quite an insightful reading. But all that is a collection of Barnum statements. I'm saying things that could apply really to anyone. This is the same principle that's used in star signs. which is another ridiculous thing, which I might do a separate episode on. But, just to nip that in the bud in one statement, do you really believe that the entire population of the globe fits neatly into 12 different categories of predictions? 7 billion people on the planet. Here's my one sentence rebuttal for those who believe in zodiac and star signs. Explain how twins live different lives. Twins are born on the same day, the same month, and yet very often go on to live completely separate lives. Why do they live separate lives with different events? Some, one twin might live a very successful life, the other one lives a short life. Why is that possible, given the fact that they share the same star sign, which presumably means they had the same predictions attributed to them? Anyway, I'm on a tangent there. The point is, guys, Barnum statements are used rather frequently by psychics. And Barnum statements, like I said, can appear rather specific, but they're not. This was all kind of clarified in an experiment that was carried out by P.T. Barnum. What he did was gathered a group of people in a room, and he said that he was going to write a specific reading about each one of them using, psychological and supernatural phenomena. He was going to write a specific reading and tell these people things that he couldn't possibly know. And he did just that. He wrote a transcript or a reading for every person in the room and then gave them their reading. And they all reported that their reading, largely speaking, the vast majority of people in the room felt that the reading was incredibly accurate, felt like it was describing their personality down to a T, right? It was just amazing, right? They were flabbergasted as to how the reading could be so accurate. Of course, the end of the experiment revealed that everybody had been actually given the same reading. So despite the fact that all 30 people had been given the same reading, they all came away with the sense that the reading had been written specifically for them and that it included details that nobody could have possibly known. And so, guys, there is a propensity for human beings to interpret Barnum statements as extremely personal and relating to them. And, this is all an offshoot of a larger category called cold reading, which is the ability, again, to appear as though you're revealing very specific information about someone while actually saying very little about them. And yeah, for that reason, guys, and the fact that psychics use this technique, it's very difficult for me to believe that it's actually real. Guys, there's one last thing I want to make you aware of. Guessing. Guessing is something that psychics use. This is one of the most irritating things about the whole experience. Every now and then, a psychic guesses something correctly. And, if they're guessing and they get something correct, it can seem quite spooky. But if it's a guess, then it's not supernatural, is it? I'll give you an example, right? Derren Brown often talks about this. If you don't know who Derren Brown is, he's a very, very famous magician in the UK. Derren Brown, when he used to do close-up magic, walking around to tables at a wedding or whatnot, he used to approach tables holding the Queen of Hearts with the back facing the audience. And he would always ask a lady, I want you to name a card that you feel says something about you. More often than not, and if you're not aware of this, there is a statistical prevalence here, but more often than not, the lady would name the Queen of Hearts. And then he would turn the card over that he was holding the entire time. And sure enough, the reaction would be absolutely incredible. What's interesting is how people remembered the event. Now, remember, Derren Brown approached the table and said, name a card that you feel says something about you. And because he's asking a lady, needless to say, most women conjure up a queen more or less immediately. And the red cards are named more often than the black cards. And so the Queen of Hearts was named. And that's obviously not supernatural. Derren is playing the odds there, and it's a very clever thing to do. I tried this at my own magic gigs, and it worked flawlessly, more often than not. On that note, when they named a card that wasn't the Queen of Hearts, I would just take the rest of the deck out of my pocket and continue as though that wasn't part of the plan. Again, guys, people don't know where you're going with a magic trick. They don't know what direction it's actually going, so the fact that I'm holding a playing card is irrelevant. I'd say name a card that you feel says something about you. Let's say the lady names the 10 of spades. I'd say, interesting, let's try something with the 10 of spades. Then I take out the rest of the deck out of my pocket. I don't walk up to the table and say, everybody, look, I'm holding this card. The card that you're about to name is going to be this one. Because then I've trapped myself. I've gone down a cul-de-sac. And if the card isn't the card that they named, then I have failed. But you can be ambiguous in your approach to an effect. And that's what this is all about. Again, what's funny is how they remember it. They often remember it by saying, they recount it by saying, he just asked me to name any card, and that was the card he was holding. Well, that's not what happened, though, is it? You were asked to name a card that says something about you, but that little detail is forgotten. And because that detail is forgotten, the recounting of the story makes the event seem much more impossible. And the supernatural element seems much more likely. Now, why do I mention all of this? Well, guys, psychics do the same thing. During a cold reading, the psychic is leading you down the garden path, asking questions, waiting for you to nod, and so forth. A psychic reading is a conversation. When a psychic says, I'm getting a sense that there's a male relative that's passed on, and you start nodding, the psychic knows that they're on the right path. And so then they continue down that path. Please notice if the psychic said, I'm getting a sense of a male relative that's passed on. If you start saying no, the psychic immediately goes into another mode of discourse, another mode of discussion. They might say something like, I don't mean passed on as in they're not with us anymore. I mean that the relationship has ended. A relationship with this male person has died. And all of a sudden you start nodding again because now perhaps they're hinting at the ending of a relationship or the ending of a friendship or something like that. They're always on their toes and reinterpreting things they've said seconds ago in order to make it fit. And so it's really, I'd love to say it's incredibly clever, but it's just the art of bullshitting. And to any of you out there who consider yourself bullshitters, I consider myself a bullshitter too. I wouldn't be this long in the magic community if I wasn't. The difference between me and a psychic is that I'm honest, that I'm bullshitting people. I don't go up and tell them that what I'm doing is real. And that's so important. I don't believe that we should be lying to people. I know that might sound strange to you as a magician to say that, but I'm not actually lying to people. I don't tell people what I'm doing is real. I tell them that you're going to see some magic and I'm a magician. Look up the definition of magician. It's somebody who pretends to do magic. At no point did I say I'm a wizard, who is a person that does real magic. So guys, to summarize this portion of the conversation and to bring the analogy to a close, when I approach that table at the wedding and I'm holding the Queen of Hearts and I ask a lady to name a card that says something about herself, she is very unlikely to recall the details when she tells that story later. In other words, when she tells people what happened, she'll probably say, oh my god, the magician just asked me to name any card and that was the card he was holding. So this principle of kind of flawed memory is something that psychics derive a great advantage from also. At the reading, when the psychic says, to take another example, you know, I'm seeing a father figure who has passed on. You know, the reason they use the phrase father figure is they don't want to commit to a biological father in case your biological father is still alive or maybe estranged or whatnot. But by saying father figure, that leaves open the window for a grandfather. It leaves open the window for an uncle or even just an older male friend or whatnot. It's you at the reading who's nodding along and providing the psychic with the confirmation that they're correct. But what's beautiful about this is, again, later on when you recount the story, you'll just tell people, oh my god, the psychic knew that my uncle, whatever, my uncle Michael had passed away. But that's not what happened. Your memory of the incident is in some way or another flawed. You're not lying. You're not intending to deceive people. Human brains are not perfect memory machines. They're not hard drives, right? We are flawed thinkers. And so we misremember things. Our memory doesn't function perfectly. And so when you retell the story, it sounds that much more supernatural. But in any case, guys, I just wanted to address guessing, because guessing happens. And given how long a psychic reading is, it's possible that a psychic is going to guess something correctly. And we have to acknowledge that. Anyway, moving on to the second part of this, and that is clairvoyance. So again, just to remind you, a clairvoyant is a person who claims that they have supernatural ability to perceive events in the future or beyond. In other words, being able to see the future. So is predicting the future possible? Well, let's imagine you go to a fortune teller because you want to know what your future is. There is this thing called the fortune teller fallacy. Imagine a fortune teller says that you're going to come into some wealth at some point in the future. Please notice that they're not specific when they make this prediction. But you're going to come into some form of wealth. You're going to win some money, say. Let's say on the way home you find a €5, £5, $5 note on the floor, right? That might sound like the fortune teller's prediction of the future was correct. They said that you were going to win money, or you were going to find money, or you were going to come into money, however they phrased it. And then you find the £5 on the floor and you say, oh my God, the fortune teller was correct. Right? Now let's imagine that doesn't happen. Let's imagine it's 6 months later and you're scratching a lotto ticket and you win £100. Oh my God, the fortune teller was correct. Okay, now let's imagine that doesn't happen. Let's imagine it's 5 years later. 5 years later, and a relative passes away and they leave you £1,000 in inheritance. Oh my God, the fortune teller was correct. Okay, now let's imagine it's 40 years later and you get news that your house is worth double its value and you sell it at a huge profit. Oh my God, the fortune teller was correct. I think if you are listening closely, you're beginning to see the problem. The fortune teller fallacy is this. Whatever the fortune teller predicts is either going to happen or it hasn't happened yet. So, you see, the fortune teller can't lose. If you speak to somebody who believes that fortune telling is a real phenomenon, and you say to them, so did that fortune teller's prediction come true? They'll say, no, not yet. Please notice that this is a position that can't be argued against. The believer will say that it either hasn't come true yet or that it already has. And it's on the believer to interpret whatever happens as being a confirmation of the prediction. So the fortune teller can't lose. The person in the remainder of their life either experiences something which can be loosely interpreted as confirming the fortune teller's prediction, or they die. And to the grave they take that expectation that the prediction was going to come true. And so the fortune teller doesn't lose. Something is always and inevitably going to happen which can be loosely interpreted as the fortune teller being correct, because life is just that way. Okay, here we go. Here's a prediction for all of you listening, all 7 of you. Here's a prediction. At some point in the future, a great opportunity is going to present itself, and you must grab it by the horns. You must take this great opportunity because it's going to have an extremely positive impact in your life. Okay, there's my prediction. Now, if you were listening and you remember that prediction, I guarantee you that this will come true for each and every one of you at some point in the future. For some of you, it will be an hour from now. For some of you, it'll be tomorrow. For others, it'll be next week. For others, again, it will be next month, next year, in a decade, whatever the case may be. It will come true for all of you who are alive. Unfortunately, some of us won't be here next year, or some of us won't be here in 40 years, or whenever. And those of us who pass away won't be alive to confirm that the prediction didn't come true. This is the fortune teller's fallacy in a nutshell. And psychics use this all the time. So guys, in other words, if you are going to say that you can predict the future, we need specifics. If you are a fortune teller and you're claiming to be able to see the future, why can't you tell me specifically what's going to happen? You know, why can't you tell me in 2029 you are going to inherit money from a relative who passes away and it's going to be hugely beneficial for you? Why the vagaries? Now, of course, a fortune teller will justify this according to, well, you know, supernatural powers are difficult to tap into and it's hard to be specific. Well, to a person like me, that just sounds like bullshit. Now, if it is true, again, I would need proof that that's true. Show me evidence of this supernatural ability that you're tapping into. Now, those of you at home who are listening to this and believe in psychic phenomena might, in fact, be screaming. And you're saying, well, you know, a fortune teller revealed something to me and they couldn't possibly know it, and it's impossible, and that's proof. That actually isn't proof. The fact that a fortune teller knew something that they couldn't know isn't proof. It's no more proof of fortune telling ability than one of my magic tricks where I know somebody's PIN code is proof. I mean, it's just not. What that is an event. It's a moment. It's an observation. The question is, how do we explain it? You can't say to someone that because they can't explain it, that therefore it's true. Or because you can't come up with a rational explanation, that therefore it's supernatural. That's not how logic and reason works, but we'll get to that in a moment. So the point is that even then, even if a fortune teller predicts the future and knows something that they couldn't possibly know, even if it was specific, the ability wouldn't be confirmed. We'd have discovered a phenomenon that needs explaining, right? So there's this thing called the argument from ignorance fallacy. And it's very important that you're aware of this, because this comes up all the time, right? It comes up in relation to God, for example. If you're a believer in God, you may have said this to somebody in the past. You may have said, well, I believe in God. And then someone says, well, I don't believe in God. And then you say to them, yeah, but you can't prove he doesn't exist. That is precisely backwards. The burden to prove something is on the person who's claiming it's true. It's on the person who's making an existential claim that something actually exists. Okay? So if I say God exists, it's my job to prove that it's true. It's not anybody else's job to prove that it's not true. That's just basic logic and reason, right? I went through this on Ducky's podcast, but, if I tell you that I've got an invisible man on my shoulder and you say you don't believe it, it would be ridiculous for me to say, yeah, well, prove he's not there. That's just a complete reversal of logic and reason. You can't do that. And so people do this with psychic phenomena, right? They say, well, this psychic knew something that they couldn't possibly know, so I believe that psychics are doing something real. And then I say, well, I don't believe you. I'm not so sure that it really was an example of psychic phenomena. And then the believer says, yeah, but you can't prove it's not. Yeah, but that's bullshit. I'm sorry, but that's not how it works. You either have evidence that it's true or you don't. And if you don't, I'm not going to believe it, and you certainly shouldn't either. And again, some of you might be screaming at home thinking, but isn't the fact that the psychic knew something that they shouldn't know, isn't that evidence of the psychic phenomenon? No, that is an unexplained event. You haven't actually done the work to prove that that was achieved using a supernatural ability. That has to be proven. You can't just assume it. But again, we get back into this argument from ignorance fallacy. What you say to someone like me who questions it, you say, well, you can't prove that it's not psychic phenomena, and so I'm just going to continue believing that it is. But again, that's a complete reversal of the burden of proof, and it's an argument from ignorance fallacy. What you're actually saying is, nobody can give me a better explanation, so therefore I'm going to continue believing that it's real psychic phenomena. But you can't do that. That's not logical, it's not reasonable. And the fact that the psychic knew something, again, isn't actually evidence. That's not actually evidence at all. That's just the unexplained event. As soon as we discover something that's unexplained, we can't just insert an explanation that suits us. Right? So if a psychic knows something that they shouldn't or couldn't know, you don't just get to conclude automatically, oh, that's psychic phenomena right there, that's proof. No, by your own admission, that's something you don't know. A good analogy for this is when you see a strange object in the sky and everybody says, oh, I don't know what that is. And then somebody in that same breath says, I don't know what it is. It must be a UFO. But you've just admitted you don't know what it is. When I say UFO, by the way, I don't mean an unexplained flying object. I mean, a flying saucer, an actual alien craft. People would say, I don't know what that is in the sky. It must be aliens. But that's an argument from ignorance. What you're actually saying there is, I don't know what it is, and so I'm just going to claim that it's aliens. And then when somebody challenges you on, how do you know it's aliens? Yeah, well, you can't prove it isn't. I trust and I hope that I've explained this well enough that you can see how illogical and how unreasonable that actually is. So if you're listening to this and you believe in psychic phenomena, and your evidence for it is that the psychic knew something that they couldn't, please understand that you don't actually have evidence that what the psychic did is actually supernatural. What you have is an experience that you couldn't explain, and so you've inserted an explanation. You couldn't explain it, and so you just concluded, irrationally in my view, that it was actually real psychic phenomena. But guys, again, that's not rational, it's not reasonable, and none of us should be doing that. But it's incredibly common, unfortunately. People engage in this kind of thinking all the time. Well, you can't prove that it's not true, so therefore I'm going to continue believing it. We need to get out of that habit because it's nonsense. It doesn't work. I've had this happen in my own life. I was speaking with a friend once who believes in psychic phenomena. This friend told me a big long story about how a psychic knew something that they couldn't possibly know. And I said, okay, so how do you know it was psychic or supernatural? How do you know that this was actually a supernatural event and that the psychic was tapping into some kind of extrasensory perception, or that they were tapping into something real and supernatural? And she said to me, well, they knew something that they couldn't possibly know, so therefore that's proof that it's supernatural. No, it's not. It's not. That's not what that is. And I had to try and explain this to my friend, and she actually became rather upset with me. And I must admit, I was very calm and considerate and kind in my response, and she was becoming angry because she couldn't defend her position. That's not evidence that what the psychic did is real. You, by your own admission, don't know how they did it. And so just like the person who says that the unexplained object in the sky must be a flying saucer, you're saying the unexplained thing that happened is somehow evidence of the supernatural. That's not how you get there. You can't say that. That's not logical. You've admitted you don't know how it's done. You don't then get to say it, so therefore it's supernatural. You not knowing how something is done is not evidence of the supernatural conclusion that you're forming. That just means you don't know. And I'm telling you, I know how they do it. If you provide me a recording of your psychic reading, I will sit down and I will point out the techniques that they're using as and when they're using them. I'll tell you when they're cold reading. I'll tell you when they're using Barnum statements. I'll probably be able to hazard a good guess myself as to when they're guessing also. I'll also be able to tell you when they're using statistical information. Right? This is explainable through purely naturalistic phenomena. You don't get to say that it's true simply because you can't explain it. That's an argument from ignorance fallacy. Again, what you're saying is, gee, I don't know how it's done, so therefore it must be supernatural. No! That's not how it works, guys. We can't do that. That's illogical. I'm going to conclude by, just discussing this guessing thing one more time. In short, it seems that human beings are uncomfortable when something is explained with reference to chance or guessing. I can already imagine that some of you listening, if you got this far in the podcast, what you're thinking right now is, that's a pretty uncompelling explanation. Oh, so you're telling me the psychic is just guessing. Well, first of all, no, I'm not telling you the psychic is just guessing. I've told you a whole bunch of techniques that they use, including cold reading and Barnum statements and so forth. But guessing is certainly part of the toolkit, yes. People are just uncomfortable with the idea that guessing is part of the explanation. But it is, guys. It is. I use it myself. There's so many times where I've guessed something correctly. I did my own psychic reading to a friend of mine recently, and I just threw out a name. I said, I don't know why, but Alice, this name Alice is coming through. Does that make sense to you? And the man's jaw dropped. And then, of course, I immediately followed up and I said, that was a guess. I was guessing. And he could not believe that was a guess. It was rather funny, actually. He was beginning to suspect that I really had psychic phenomena, but that I just didn't want to admit that I did. And I was trying to explain it through naturalistic means to kind of cover up the skill itself, to cover up the fact that it's real, as though I was part of some kind of anonymous psychic agency with an interest in keeping the whole thing a secret. I was like, no, what are you saying? Oh my God. How deep does the irrationality go? How could someone actually believe that I was just covering it up? I guessed. Get over it. Guessing is a potential explanation. And if you're still not convinced, let me give you one final fact to kind of tie it all together. If you have been to a psychic reading, if you have been to a fortune teller, ask yourself this question. How long did the reading take? How long were you in the company of the fortune teller or psychic or clairvoyant? How long were you there? The average response is between 30 and 45 minutes. Really. In 30 to 45 minutes, how many groundbreaking, impossible pieces of information were revealed to you? And if you ask someone that question, usually to give you an answer of maybe about 2 or 3 pieces of information that were really and truly shocking. So really, in 30 to 45 minutes, sometimes an hour, all that was revealed to you that was truly shocking and impossible was 3 pieces of information. And yet they were talking at you for 60 minutes. If ever you wanted evidence that guessing is part of the explanation, that's it. If somebody is talking at you using cold reading and Barnum statements for 60 minutes, 45 minutes, 30 minutes. Of course they're going to stumble across something accurate. Of course they are. Are you kidding me? And guys, you can lead someone up the garden path and trap them with this. What I always do is, when I'm talking to someone about psychic phenomena, I ask them this question first. So, in that psychic reading, how many pieces of information were revealed to you that were truly breathtaking, that were truly impossible? Not the smaller stuff. How many things were truly, impossible to you and served as compelling evidence of the supernatural? Usually you get a response of between 2 to 4 pieces of information that were impossible. Then you ask them the second question. And so how long was the reading, by the way? And they'll tell you it was between 30 minutes to an hour. And that's when you drop the logic bomb. So really, in a 30 to 60 minute reading, only 3 pieces of information were revealed that were truly impossible. That's 1 piece of information every 10 minutes. Is that not evidence of guessing? Guessing works, guys. Guessing works. It's a real thing. It's part of the toolkit of a psychic or a clairvoyant or someone who claims to have telepathic powers. It's a real thing. Okay? I hope I've made that clear. So guys, in closing, I hope I've done something to convince you, or rather persuade you out of the belief that psychic phenomena is real. I guess I would like to say in my final thoughts here, guys, this stuff is dangerous and it's exploitative. It's disgusting to me above all else. I think it's abhorrent. People are exploited and manipulated by psychics, mediums, and clairvoyants. These people take advantage of our ignorance. And if you're not educated on trickery, if you don't have an in-depth knowledge of, cold reading or Barnum statements, or if you're not familiar with any of these tricks of the trade, then yeah, sure, you're going to go to a fortune teller or a clairvoyant or someone who has telepathic abilities, allegedly, and you're going to come away potentially convinced, completely sold on the idea that it's real, but you are simply being exploited. You are simply being exploited for a rather high fee, I might add, because they don't do this for free. And so I wanted to conclude by making that point. This stuff is dangerous. It's exploitative. If you're wondering why I say dangerous, I guess this could be my final point. Guys, if you're willing to believe something on bad evidence, or no evidence for that matter, well then the floodgates are open. If you believe things for bad reasons, well then you're more likely to believe other things for bad reasons. And believing things for bad reasons is very dangerous, because the next bad thing you start believing might actually be life-threatening, right? If you start buying into homeopathy and rather than going to the doctor, you get a water-based treatment, well, then you're going to get very, very sick and potentially die. And this happens all of the time, right? If you're struggling mentally and you go to see a psychic or a clairvoyant in order to help with your mental problems rather than going to a psychiatrist or a counselor, which is what you should do, again, you are playing roulette with your mental and physical health. Believing things on bad evidence is very dangerous, because you're one step removed from believing something that's life-threatening. Now, I'm not saying that attending a psychic or a medium is life-threatening. I'm simply making the point that if we don't base our beliefs on solid foundations, if we can't support them, well, then you are, very close to a form of fundamentalism. If you can't be reasoned out of your position using evidence, well then, all hope is lost. We must be susceptible to reason. We must be susceptible to rationality. If we're unwilling to change our minds in the presence of evidence, logic, and reason, well then the world is doomed. Because all we have, to quote Sam Harris, a very influential philosopher and very influential on me, all we have is conversation. The only other option other than conversation is violence. If somebody believes something that's dangerous and is harmful to themselves and others, and they're unwilling to converse, and they pose a threat to society, guys, it's terrifying to think what the consequences are. And so some of you might think I've gone too far there, but I'm just genuinely concerned about people's ability to change their mind. You must be able to change your mind in the presence of logic, evidence, and reason. And I guess I just hope that I've presented enough evidence, logic, and reason in this podcast in order to convince you that psychics are, quote, full of shit. I hope you enjoyed episode 1 of this podcast. If you liked it, please do leave a like. I will not make more of these if it doesn't get a good response. And the only way I'll know if you enjoyed it is if indeed you leave a like on the video and comment below and let me know your thoughts. If I don't get much traction or much of a response, this will be the first and last episode. So guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, if you did, leave a like, leave a comment below. It's been wonderful chatting to you today. And I guess I'll see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.